The guy begins his story that he did not invent this story. Everything stands before his eyes as if it were yesterday. In fact, it was yesterday. The warrior fought with a huge snake monster, and at the same time made fun of it, claiming that it was moving too slowly. But the guy had one problem: inattention. The monster opened its mouth, intending to attack the warrior with a cluster of fiery energy. The young man was lying on the ground directly in front of the direction of the snake's attack. Suddenly the guy's armor began to crumble. The warrior realized that his situation was terrible. The young man gets angry too easily. He concentrated energy in his hands, jumped into the air, about to attack the snake. And then the guy instantly breaks the distance between the enemy, and begins to deliver a series of blows to him. The guy liked the feeling of increased strength that he experienced. The warrior takes out his sword and begins to strike the monster with the snake. The guy liked to swing the sword and use magic, but there was something he didn't like at all. The guy had a secret. Suddenly the guy's attack stopped. The battle space changed to a room. The young man heard the footsteps of heels approaching him. A woman with white hair and a dress approached the young man. The young man did not understand where she had come from, and thought that she was his fan, following on his heels. The woman approached the guy's bed, but as luck would have it, he wanted to sleep, as he was exhausted from the battle. The stranger rested her hand on the warrior's bed. The woman bent down to the guy and kissed his forehead, and the young man smelled the flowers coming from her. The young man had pleasant thoughts. He liked this light morning kiss, and even from such a beauty. The guy wondered if she had really been there all this time and admired him. The young man realizes that he can no longer hold back and stretches out his palms to her. The young man presses his palms to her face and lures her towards him. But suddenly, the young man becomes aware of what is happening. The guy realizes that he is in the body of a baby. The young man in the body of a child screamed, but it sounded like a child's cry, and the girl thought that he was hungry. The guy realized that he had been reborn again. The young man, now a baby, began to understand that in a past life he had died, but did not understand how it happened. But unlike other people, this guy was reborn every time after death, and so on ad infinitum. The girl carried the baby to his crib. The stranger gave the baby a bottle of milk. The guy decided to drink it and not think about difficult things. This was the guy's 101st rebirth. If his memory serves him right, the guy's first life was spent in Korea. That life was hell, a whirlwind of endless interviews and job searches. It was a dreary life with a dreary ending, because the young man was eventually hit by a car, and when his life was cut short in this way, the guy was reborn for the first time. When the young man woke up, he found himself in the body of a baby, in a completely unfamiliar family of foreigners. And since then the young man has been reborn again and again. But what was amazing was that the young man was reborn in different worlds and eras. However, the guy's life scenario only repeated itself over and over again. The young man has nothing special to boast about. He was simply accustomed to this state of affairs and went with the flow. For the guy, rebirth became something ordinary. The baby wondered where he was thrown this time. Judging by the luxurious vintage furnishings of the interior, the guy realized that he was somewhere in the Middle Ages. But the baby thought that he was unlikely to be on Earth again. It would be illogical for rebirth, because he was probably in another world. Having finished the milk, the baby dreamily thought that he liked other worlds. According to his recollections, other worlds were more comfortable for the young man. Looking around the room again, the young man thought that he was in a rich family. The maid also appeared, which only indicated that the baby was now in a noble family. The baby rejoiced at his happiness, because his mother also loves him. Each world had its own language. The mother asked if the baby was full. It often happens that you don't understand a lot at first when you find yourself in a new world. But from the warm and gentle hands, from the look full of love, everything was immediately clear. His mom really loves him. Having changed hundreds of mothers, the guy could definitely say that many give birth purely out of a sense of duty. No matter how bitter it may sound, it also happened that a guy was abandoned immediately after birth, or they even forced him to work off the life given to him. But about this life, the guy had a good feeling. Suddenly, someone called the woman by the name of Lillian. It was the maid. She suggested that Mrs. Lillian leave the prince with her if she herself was tired. Then the guy was surprised. It turns out he was a prince. But the woman's expression suddenly changed sharply from joyful to cold. Madame Lillian suddenly asked the servants if everyone recognized her son as a prince. The woman asked the maid's opinion, to which she instantly replied that everyone would recognize her son as a prince. But the mistress grinned. She did not believe the maid and asked not to lie. Because they were alone here, the woman suspected that this maid also thought badly of him. But the servants again insisted on their own, refuting Lillian's words. The woman apologized and explained to the servants that recently one of the maids had allowed herself too much, and the guy in the body of a child realized why his current mother's face changed. Lillian explained that although the baby is a prince, and the imperial blood flows in him, his fate will not be easy, and it would be easier if her son Earl were not a prince. The woman turned to the baby and asked him if he was offended by this. The lady added that she knows that now everyone is just talking about her and her baby, and because of Lillian, Earl has no right to inherit the throne. The woman apologized to her son and began to cry, but the baby wiped the tears from her face. Lillian turned to her maid Chelsea. Had she seen this? It seemed to the woman that her son, although just a baby, understood everything, but the maid gently replied that this could not be. The kid mentally asked his mother not to be sad, because he is fine, and it doesn't matter that he won't inherit the throne. After all, even the life of a prince is already luck for him. The boy decided that he simply would not pay attention to any annoying nobles, and even the imperial family will not be able to control it. The kid thought that the prince's life promised to be eventful. His 101st life, isn't it the life of a dream? So, the reborn baby was the son of an emperor and a former maid, such a half-breed. This is a life that can be spent quite well if you don't get involved in politics. After all, since the blood of the emperor flows in him, he will be guaranteed more comfortable conditions. From all these thoughts, baby Earl laughed in his crib, which attracted the attention of the women standing nearby. Lillian noticed that this baby is still so happy and carefree, but the lady was worried that she did not have enough strength to protect the baby from all this. The boy wondered what kind of power we were talking about, but then Earl realized that power can't hurt anyone. After all, any native of the nobility must be able to stand up for himself, so he will have to study. However, for the guy this is a common thing. The lack of the right to the throne is a weakness, because no one needs the guy. And if he is weak, then no one will stand up for him. They will even rather look for a way to get rid of him. But the baby mentally reassured his mother. After all, her son had previously lived a huge number of lives as warriors. 3 months passed after Earl's rebirth. The woman approached her son's crib. He was dozing peacefully, not thinking about anything. Lillian called him an angel and smiled. The lady said that his hair color was beautiful. But then the maid Chelsea came in and told the mistress that the carriage was ready. Lillian told her that it was already on its way. The woman kissed her son and said that she would be back soon, so don't let him be bored. Lillian walked towards the exit with Chelsea, the door slamming behind them. The boy was indignant that he did not finish watching the cool dream because of the sound of the door, forcing him to wake up. But the same baby calmed down, afraid that the nanny would come running to his voice, from whom there is not even a second of peace. Since he is a child, everyone is doing nothing but babying me. And the baby also noticed that overprotection is so tiring. While the baby was alone, he decided to check something. After all, his future depends on this. The guy hoped that the imperial blood contained at least some kind of ancestral power. And if it is so, you need to learn how to use it. The kid tried to concentrate, folding his hands in a spell. Earl thought that the world is ruled by the strongest. When you are strong, no one dares to object to you. At least you can use the experience of the previous 100 lives. Even in the body of a child, Earl could accumulate inner strength. A small blue light sphere appeared. The boy realized that strength was available here. The baby thought that he could, for example, use techniques from his 30th life. The guy decided to try to use 2 techniques at the same time, because even in the body of a child it should work. After all, no one would think that a child at that age can train. And if the business works out, by about 10 years of age Earl's internal strength will increase significantly. And by 20 years the guy will generally be indestructible. The kid decided that first he needed to concentrate on the energy as best as possible. This way the guy can train anywhere, even on the nanny's neck. Concentrating the energy into a blue sphere, Earl decided to speed up, combine the flow from his entire body and gather the energy together. And then the baby felt it became more difficult for him to breathe. The baby's head is already starting to pound, and then the moment came when it was necessary to release the energy. But suddenly Chelsea's maid ran into the room. The guy took a break so as not to be discovered by the nanny, but the maid thought that perhaps the diapers were wet. The young man mentally drove the annoying woman away from him, because even with a small touch, all the accumulated energy would disappear. The maid decided that the baby's diapers were normal. Chelsea agreed that the prince was simply having a nightmare and left his bedroom. As soon as the door of the room slammed, Earl continued his plan in action. The energy was now at its maximum, but it still needed to be held a little. The guy began to feel feverish. He was afraid that the baby's body might not be able to withstand it. But Earl resolutely sets himself up, because it is better to die than to live in the body of a weakling. The kid realized that he needed to quickly accumulate a lot of energy, and the guy did all this for a prosperous future life. Earl screamed at the peak of energy concentration. The maid heard this from his room and went back to check on the baby. And then Chelsea runs into the baby's room, opening the door wide open. The nanny runs up to the prince's crib. She doesn't understand why the baby was sweating, but he seemed to be sleeping. The woman decided to prepare a bath with herbs and bathe him later. With these words, she left the baby's bedroom. Earl jumped out of bed and exclaimed joyfully. He was glad that everything turned out as he had planned. The maid held the baby in her arms. He looked healthy and cheerful. Chelsea was glad that the prince was feeling well, and Earl mentally sighed with relief, because he was glad that the nanny didn't notice anything. Using the mana concentration technique, the guy can easily accumulate it in his body, and for this Earl did not need to do anything. He became stronger even when he was just eating or sleeping. The boy could not contain his wide, satisfied smile. Earl understood that even after 3 years he would accumulate so much energy that he would be comparable in strength to most adults. And when he turned 10 years old, then no one in this world would be able to do anything for him, even if he himself lived 100 lives. The woman felt something in the air, but did not understand what it was. The boy distracted the maid with his laughter, and she could only be touched by this. Meanwhile, the boy became stronger, and when he becomes stronger, he will then begin to live like a king. He is really looking forward to this. I wish this day would come sooner. 5 months have passed since Earl's birth. Thanks to the mana absorption technique, his physical capabilities have grown greatly, and internal energy is already accumulating faster than that of his peers, and mana is automatically collected. The kid thought that it was okay. Everyone starts by crawling on the floor, and when the time comes, he will have a lot of strength. But Lillian caught her crawling son. She praised him for his activity and brought him something. The woman was holding a rattle in her hands, but the baby didn't understand what it was. But he was stuck on the rattle and couldn't take his eyes off it. But Earl noticed the sadness on his mother's face, and then the baby began to laugh and pretend that he really liked the rattle. Lillian was delighted and told the baby that she knew that he would like the toy. But the baby himself felt Spanish shame in his head, because he had the mind of an adult. The women noted that the prince looked happy. Lillian said that she would often play with him. The lady noted that her son was cute, and who was he so handsome to look like? The guy noted to himself that he was like his mother, of course. The boy decided to play along with the women. Since he is loved, he must take advantage of it, because this time is too fleeting, and therefore priceless. But then the mistress and the servants noticed that the baby had stopped smiling. They thought that he was already tired, but in reality, Earl was just hungry. But fortunately, Nanny Chelsea guessed that the prince might be hungry. The baby was given a bottle of milk. Meanwhile, Lillian and Chelsea began to discuss the financial situation. The maid said that the prince needs to be well fed, and since yesterday there have been less and less funds allocated. And the mistress answered her that she knows this. But the lady said that she could not do anything about it, because the budget for the maintenance of the mansion was greatly cut this year, and it is difficult to raise even one child. Meanwhile, Earl listened to their conversation while drinking milk. The boy remembered that he had already heard a similar conversation not so long ago. The maids talked about how they would have to save even on the mistress's diet, because there was no other choice. But then the guy didn't think that they were serious about it. The mistress said that she would not die of hunger, and that was good, and the servants suggested somehow saving money on security. The baby could not believe that this was all true, because the mother was really a simple concubine. She had neither power nor status, even taking into account the fact that she gave birth to a prince. This situation is further aggravated by the fact that it is winter. Something needs to be done, otherwise he and the prince will disappear, because now they won't even be able to engage in farming. And the guy figured that since he was a prince, they wouldn't let him die in infancy. Chelsea suggested asking His Majesty for help, but the lady replied that it was difficult to see him. He had been very busy lately. Now Earl understood where his mother constantly went, and it seems that she never managed to get an audience. No matter how tough his father was, it is unacceptable to behave this way towards the mother of his children. The baby did not understand why this ruler was doing this to this unfortunate woman. She already had enough of the bullying of the nobles. Even if the king was initially indifferent to Lillian, such an attitude is terrible. Earl burst into tears, and Chelsea thought that he wanted to see his mommy and gave the baby to the mistress. The guy really wanted to help his new mother, even though he was a child. But he thought that there was probably something he could do. But nothing really came to mind. But he promised himself that he would definitely come up with something. At night the boy did not sleep, but thought about how to help his mother to survive this winter. The boy thought that the whole point was a lack of money for all their needs. In winter, a new expense item appeared, such as heating. The kid thought for a very long time, but suddenly an idea came into his head. The child looked at the fireplace and began to speculate if coal was a carbon structure, like diamonds. Earl noticed that his mother wore gemstones, which meant that they were also valued in this world. The baby decided that if there was no money, he would try to create at least a precious stone. But the guy could not get out of the crib because of the children's small legs. The kid thought that with the amount of mana he had, he could take to the air and fly to his target. Earl understood that he would not be found out if he took some charcoal, because there was already so much of it here. The kid fooled around a little and thought that with a slight movement of his hand he would turn this piece of coal into a diamond. But then he came to his senses and became serious. Because while everyone was sleeping, he had to turn coal into diamond. Earl began converting mana into thermal energy, locally creating the pressure and temperature necessary to transform the coal. The baby decided to try to spend more mana, because he could still accumulate more if he survived. The kid thought that under no circumstances should energy leakage be allowed. The guy continued to compress the clot of energy into a small ball. He tried to release more internal energy, and hold on until the last. There was very little left. The boy was already thinking how happy his mother would be. Here the baby is making his last efforts for his mother. And then huge clouds of smoke came out of the fireplace chimney of the boy's room, and a blue bright light came on in his bedroom. Earl succeeded. He was able to turn coal into a beautiful iridescent diamond. All he had to do was figure out how to slip it in. In the morning, the maid came to the prince's bedroom to check on him, but she was immediately stunned by what she saw. The prince climbed out of the crib himself and sat on the floor. The woman wondered how the baby could get down if it was so high there. Chelsea picked up the baby and carried it to the crib, hoping the baby hadn't been lying on the cold floor all night. Then the maid noticed that the prince was covered in some kind of dirt. She looked around, wondering out loud where the baby could have gotten so dirty. The nanny noticed that even the blanket had fallen out, and noted that it looked like the prince had been having fun all night. And then the woman noticed the floor, which was also smeared. Chelsea thought that the palace had not been cleaned for a long time, but it was good that the baby was not cold. Suddenly the servant noticed something in the boy's mouth. The nanny asked the baby to spit out this object, and a diamond appeared from his mouth, which the boy created that night. Chelsea was delighted with what she saw. She could not believe that it was a diamond, and did not understand where the prince could find it. The maid understood that such a treasure could not lie on the floor, because she often and very carefully cleaned it. The nanny hugged the prince and said that perhaps they could now get out of this difficult situation. The maid praised Earl, and the baby thought that his mother would like it too. After this, carts with supplies were poured into the palace. Everyone received enough firewood to survive the winter. The empty kitchen pantry quickly filled with food. In general, that diamond was sold at the best price. The money received was enough to cover 5 years of living expenses. The lady wondered if they had done the right thing, if the diamond belonged to someone, but Chelsea replied that this could not be. The nanny explained that the castle had been empty for almost 100 years before they moved here. The maid assumed that this was a gift from God sent from heaven for the prince, to which Lillian agreed with a smile looking at her son. Earl crawled up to his mother and mentally promised that when he grew up, he would definitely relieve the woman of all worries. All winter the palace was regularly warmed by a fireplace. The financial situation has changed for the better. The tables were covered with a variety of food, and the lady doubted that she would eat it all alone. But the maid reassured her and told her not to think about anything and just eat. Servants who had to be fired were rehired, But the most important thing was that my mother stopped being sad. The baby mentally noted that his mother is so beautiful when she smiles. The winter turned out to be very cold, and a snowstorm was raging outside, but everyone spent it in warmth and comfort. A year has passed. Today everyone was fussing around the baby. The maid was choosing an outfit for Earl. The nanny consulted with the mistress, but she liked all the outfits. But then Lillian herself suggested the outfit. Women spent a long time choosing an outfit for their baby, and he was already tired of this process of changing clothes. The guy began to suspect that some kind of holiday was planned. The baby decided to cry so that the women would get away from him, and they would put Earl in the crib. The maid happily said that today they would finally officially introduce the prince to the imperial family. The baby lay in his crib and wondered what this meant. The lady added that she was glad that everyone managed to survive this year safely. The woman said that they must recognize him, even though he is still a child, but he has imperial blood flowing in him, and his birthday is the best occasion. Chelsea was sure that His Majesty would appear, because he could not ignore his mistress forever. It's just that fathers often try to stay away from newborns. Earl finally realized that today's event was arranged to celebrate his birthday. Lillian explained that her son would officially join the royal family, and it was good that at least the laws of the empire were on Earl's side in this. The boy noticed that his mother was very worried, although she was smiling. But then the boy realized that since there was a banquet, it meant that all sorts of different aristocrats would show up here. The boy noticed that he would at least look at his dad. The banquet began. The tables were set with various snacks, dishes, and drinks. Live music played a beautiful melody in the hall. Various rich noble people gathered in this hall. The kids sat on a chair and admired how great it was here. He was wondering how much money was spent on all this. Everyone was so dressed up that Earl wondered if this was really the way to dress for banquets. The woman took her son in her arms and asked him if he liked it here. The maid suggested that he was embarrassed by the new faces, because the prince had never seen so many people. But Lillian told the prince not to be afraid, because he is the most important one here, and kissed him on the cheek. But then the kid noticed that the aristocrats began to look askance at him. But the boy decided to simply not pay attention to them, because he was expecting to meet his father. Tyler was the man who was Earl's father, and the boy wants to look into his shameless eyes, because he never showed up in their house. But then the baby decided that he didn't care how this man lived. Earl just wanted to know what he looked like, in case he had a bad heredity. Soon after the start of the banquet, these people finally arrived. The imperial family entered the banquet hall. Everyone around them stepped aside. The boy guessed that this was the current empress and her children. It really was the empress. She was wearing a crown and a luxurious red dress. Her hair was golden and pulled back. And behind her came her children, who looked like her and were Earl's half-brothers and sisters. And the eldest stood out from the others. His younger brothers and sisters were nearby, and there was even one redhead among them. But the whole family was suspiciously serious. Earl was infuriated that they walked past his mother, as if she did not exist. But Lillian noticed her son's dissatisfaction, and with a smile asked him to be patient a little longer, because soon it would all be over. The boy thought that despite everything, his mother was smiling, and those in front admired the beauty of the empress. Suddenly the woman's gaze darted somewhere. Her face became agitated. The emperor entered the banquet hall. Everyone around said to greet His Majesty. Tyler had a terrifying look in his eyes as he walked forward proudly. The boy felt strong energy from the man. The emperor simply passed by, and the chatty nobles and their servants immediately became silent. They all bowed their heads before him. The boy felt the power emanating from Tyler on an instinctive level. Suddenly the man turned to face Lillian and her son and fixed his serious gaze on them. The baby tried to understand whether the man was looking at him or his mother. Earl was thinking that it was a pity that rebirth didn't give him the ability to read other people's thoughts, because it would be great if the boy knew what they were thinking. And meanwhile Tyler went to his place. After some time, Earl began to be given gifts. Aristocrats approached the prince with congratulations. Of course, the time has come for the imperial family to congratulate. They did not hesitate to openly express their relationship with Earl and his mother. The boy was furious at the caustic words of the aristocrats. The baby didn't understand how they dared to talk like that. They probably didn't even consider them people, which made the child have a strong desire to test their ears with an infant ultrasound. Lillian calmed her son and offered milk, but the boy changed his mind about shouting. He decided that it was not worth it. It would only disgrace his mother, because hypocrisy was commonplace here, unfortunately. The prince wanted to leave quickly, because he felt that he could fall asleep right in his mother's arms. But suddenly someone pulled the boy's cheek. It was some little girl, she called Earl Chubby. The boy thought that this was probably the daughter of one of the emperor's concubines. And she was still at that age when you don't realize your real status. More of the aristocrats came up to congratulate the prince on his birthday. Lillian thanked the ladies for coming, and wished them to enjoy the banquet. But the women ignored the lady and walked away without saying anything. When the banquet came to an end, Prince and his mother breathed a sigh of relief in unison. But then the empress approached Lillian and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The woman asked Ella how she got there, to which the empress replied that there were no problems on the way here, and the woman added that it was all thanks to her son, the heir to the throne, who was next to her, and with her gaze she pointed to the side where her son stood. Earl looked at the blonde boy, who looked very much like his mother. The boy wondered why Ella was showing off her son, although this was expected of the empress. She noticed that Earl looked so much like his mother. The empress called her dear, and the boy mentally sent her away. The prince suspected that Ella must have had a hand in their plight. Even if no one cared about it, the castle's funding would not have been reduced to such a low level so dramatically. They had to use nights to get firewood, and Earl's clothes, as it turned out, were sewn by servants from rags and scraps. The empress wished Earl a long life, and Lillian thanked her for it. Having already turned around, Ella grinned evilly after her. Suddenly the emperor himself approached Earl and his mother. The man asked Lillian how she was and if everything was okay with her, if she had gotten used to the castle. The woman thanked your majesty for your kindness, and said that it was more than what the boy resisted in his thoughts and became angry at her words. The child began to cry, but in his thoughts he asked the man to give him money, at least for living expenses. Tyler looked at his son thoughtfully, and asked Lillian to give him Earl to look at. The man noticed that the baby was no longer crying, and his other children roared nonstop when they saw his face. Earl mentally cursed the emperor, and decided to smile at him on purpose. Tyler noted the kid was funny, but the boy mentally challenged him. He was preparing to show his father something. Earl, with hints and gestures, asked the emperor to lower him to the floor. Lillian told the man that her son couldn't walk yet. Tyler replied that it was probably because he was only a year old, anyway. But suddenly everyone present in the hall directed their gaze somewhere. Earl got to his feet and walked, which plunged everyone present, especially the emperor, into great shock. The boy, smiling, felt like the star of the evening. The lady and the servants were happy for the prince. The emperor covered his satisfied smile with his hand and said that the baby was full of surprises. And the baby was heading to the table. He wanted to show his father that he was definitely different from other children right in front of everyone. Earl grabs the tablecloth and pulls it down, throwing all the food and drinks onto the floor. Lillian covers her face in horror, and the nanny is also shocked. But the boy planned everything this way. Everyone was so inspired by the prince's first steps that no one noticed that this was a carefully planned strategy. The prince chose the most appropriate moment, walked up to the table and sharply pulled the tablecloth towards himself, which is exactly what the boy wanted. The emperor approached his son and lifted the baby from the floor. Earl also yelled for effect, because after all, he was a child. Tyler asked the baby if he was hurt, and decided to examine him. The man noticed that he only doused himself with wine. Then the child's mother ran up. The emperor reassured her, saying that the little one was safe. He just needed to change his clothes. The maid offered her help when suddenly Tyler noticed something and stopped the woman. The baby was wearing shabby clothes. The servants remembered well that they had dressed the prince in all new clothes in the morning. The emperor became gloomy and rose from the floor along with the baby. Those present discussed what the baby was wearing. Their contemptuous glances stared at Earl and the emperor, and they began to spread rumors about the prince's plight. The emperor shouted at them and ordered them to be silent. Tyler asked seriously what kind of life they had. This morning the boy was changed by the nanny, and after she left, Earl concentrated his energy and began to stretch the fabric with all his might. It gave in easily. Giving it a worn look was not difficult. If he had adult muscles, it would have been possible without wasting mana. But the most important thing is that the boy managed to bring the inconvenient truth to public view, so that everyone knows what is hidden behind the outer glass. The emperor sternly asked for an explanation of how this happened. It was so difficult to live in accordance with the status. Lillian trembled in fear. Tyler said okay, she's not the one to ask. The man called his servant. The emperor asked the servant how much money was allocated for the maintenance of the concubines' castles and why this happened at an important event. The servant said that the master personally gave the order to distribute the budget equally. Everything was carried out in accordance with the order. The man demanded clarification on how exactly it would be divided. The emperor ordered that the report be brought to him immediately. The kid was glad that his father was determined. Lillian apologized to the emperor. The woman took her son into her arms, and Earl mentally asked his mother and Nanny to be patient a little longer, because this was a chance for all of them. The servant returned with the report and handed it to the emperor. Everyone around stood in suspense, waiting for the outcome of events. The emperor looked through the entire report and understood everything. The man angrily crumpled the report sheets. The man incinerated the crumpled paper with his magic. He could not believe what he saw. Lillian waited in fear for the emperor's final words. The entire banquet hall fell into tense silence. The kid thought that it seemed that the emperor was not aware of all this. Finally, the man broke the silence and called the empress. Tyler asked Ella if she knew and how to understand it. Ella silently looked at the emperor with a frightened gaze, but the empress instantly regained her composure and calmly asked if something was wrong. The emperor explained to the woman that a hole had suddenly appeared in the budget, and his concubines received almost nothing. The empress made a surprised face and said that this could not be. Tyler was angry because he didn't believe that Ella might not be in the know, since budget distribution was her direct responsibility. Suddenly, her eldest son came out in front of the woman and blocked his mother. The guy tried to object to his father. He said that he was sure that this was some kind of misunderstanding, and his mother would never. But they did not let him finish. The emperor said that what difference does it make? Because the leader is responsible for the mistakes of his subordinates. Because of Ella's negligence, his younger brother was left hungry and naked. The young man looked at Earl, who mentally swore at him and noticed that the eldest son had neither the charisma of the emperor nor the cunning of the empress. Tyler continued to scold the young man. He asked if he was sure that Ella had nothing to do with it, but the guy only remained silent in response. The emperor told his wife that he was disappointed in her, and the entire hall plunged into pitch silence. Lillian broke the silence. She asked His Majesty not to blame the lady and took all the blame upon herself. The emperor sternly asked the woman what kind of mistake she was talking about. Tyler added that Lillian carried and gave birth to the emperor's child. The man added that this was enough to be considered a member of the imperial family. Earl's mom tried to object, but Tyler told her that she should already realize her status in society, and pulled the woman towards him. Ella looked at all this with fury in her eyes. The emperor ordered that those responsible be found and brought to justice, because he would not tolerate such mistakes again. The empress bowed and told her husband that she would make sure this did not happen again. Tyler repeated that next time she would be punished. Ella said that she would definitely find the culprit and punish him to the fullest extent. The empress approached Lillian and said that she was sorry and did not know how to justify herself to her. But Earl's mom said there was no need to apologize to her. The boy in his thoughts did not understand his mother's words and said that the empress knew about everything. But now she was lying. Ella vowed that this would never happen again. The prince noticed that there was not a drop of guilt on the empress's face. Ella intimidated all the concubines with her power. Thus Earl's birthday came to an end. The hole in the budget was patched, and a last resort was quickly found. This was a family of minor aristocrats. They were exposed as guilty and executed without any special proceedings. The maids discussed that at the end of the investigation they even admitted their guilt. No one knew what the criminals were going to do with such a huge amount of money. One of the maids was glad that the problem had been resolved. Earl was sure that the real instigator escaped punishment, and once the execution was completed, the case was closed. The boy was outraged by this injustice. The prince wanted to grow up quickly and kill them all. But then Earl cried because he wanted to eat. The maid came running and began to feed the boy, wanting him to grow big and strong. Earl agreed. He still needs to work on his body for a long time, because he will not grow up anytime soon. But the boy was glad that all he had to do here was eat and play, which he really liked. The maid told the baby that since he had eaten, it was now time to sleep. After sleep, the boy could not understand how long he slept. Looking around the room, Earl noticed the nanny sleeping in a chair nearby. The boy quietly used his mana and flew up to the window to look. There was a mother's carriage outside, accompanied by knights. The boy heard footsteps and caught himself. 3 people were approaching Earl's bedroom, one of them his mother. There were also steps of an adult, and a child. 3 people had already approached the door of the prince's bedroom. The kid didn't know what to do with the nanny. If she woke up, everyone would see his strength. The child flew into the air and flew straight to the nanny. Suddenly the door opened and 2 women and a girl entered. Earl's mom saw something that surprised her. The boy pinched the nanny on the cheek. She felt pain, and she asked the prince to stop. Lillian asked Earl to stop hurting Nanny Chelsea. The lady added that the nanny must be loved and obeyed. The maid noticed Mrs. Shelley. She apologized for not noticing the mistress right away. Shelley replied that everything was fine, because she herself did not warn about the visit. The boy recognized Shelley. She was at a banquet on the occasion of his birthday. Lillian said that if she had known in advance, she would have met her better. But Shelley replied that it was okay. She was silent in order to arrive incognito. The guest asked her daughter to sit here and let her talk alone with Lady Lillian. In one of the halls, Lillian and her guests set a table with tea. Earl's mom didn't know why Shelley came here, but the woman suspected that the conversation would be serious. Suddenly Lillian coughed. The guest asked her how she was. The woman replied that everything was fine. Earl's mom asked Shelley again what she wanted to say. The woman told her that she would like to apologize, but Lillian did not understand what she meant. But Shelley explained that she apologized for her behavior at the banquet in honor of the prince's birthday, and once again asked for forgiveness. After her words there was silence. In the recent past, at the height of hostilities on the continent, the Shelley family made the greatest contribution to victory. There was no one in the empire who had not heard of the Shelley family. But now everything is in the past. Recently, no boys were born into the family, and the fame quickly faded. There are rumors that they have been very strapped for cash for the past few years. Lillian asked if it was all because of the family. Shelley told her that yes, they were in debt. The woman told how Ella called her for a few words. Shelley took out a bag of coins and gave it to Lillian, but she resisted and did not want to take it. But Shelley explained that this is what she wants, and added that she understands that this is not enough to solve the problem. Lillian silently looked at the bag of gold. Shelley apologized again, said that she was truly sorry and that she was not forgiven. The woman added that Lillian may hate her, but she shouldn't think badly of her family. Shelley notices that her daughter went into another room and looked at the bookcase. Lillian understood that the guest wanted to protect her daughter from conflicts with other members of the imperial family. Earl's mom said that she was fine and that she really didn't need the money because she believed in Lady Shelley's innocence. The woman tried to object and asked not to feel sorry for her, but Lillian replied that she did not feel sorry. The lady answered the guests directly that there was no need for them to be at enmity. Lillian added that she understood everything and did not hold a grudge. The woman gave Shelley the money back and asked that it be better spent on a gift for her little daughter. Lillian said that everything was clear to her. The woman was referring to the reason why her palace had its expenses cut so much. Although Earl's mother was not sure, she thought that this was the case. Shelley understood the reason, because she knew who the woman used to be. Lillian was Her Majesty's maid. And then Earl heard this and was shocked. He did not know that his mother used to work for the Empress. But now he understood why Ella disliked her so much. Because of all this reasoning, the baby began to make loud noises. The nanny ran up to him, but the boy immediately laughed. The maid Chelsea noted the changeability of the prince's mood. With these words, the servants walked away from the prince's crib. Chelsea sat down at the table where the guest's daughter Candy was sitting and asked how much the princess had read. The kid decided to use his energy to eavesdrop on the women's conversation again. Lillian said that she could understand Ella, so she took this attitude for granted. The woman added that, however, she could not hide from her oppression. So Earl's mom thought and decided, until her son grows up, she will protect him and will not allow Ella to harm her family anymore. Lillian invited Lady Shelley to be friends. She was surprised at such an offer. This was not just a conspiracy, but a unification of the forces of the concubines. Shelley agreed to the woman's proposal. If someone suddenly finds themselves backed into a corner, at least there will be somewhere to wait for a helping hand. That's what it was needed for. Earl realized that his mother, it turns out, knew everything. She knew about the conflict between the Empress and the concubines. The boy did not know what Lillian would do and whether he should prepare in advance for all this. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by Candy suddenly appearing at his bedside. The girl beamed, looking at her stepbrother, and Earl could only think about getting her to leave him alone. But a moment later, Candy was already sitting in the boy's crib and pulling his cheeks. saying that his brother was soft and warm. The guy was indignant at the girl's behavior in his thoughts. Chelsea's maid noticed the princess in the crib and ran up to them, the boy mentally begging for help. But the nanny asked Candy that the prince was very cute, and the girl agreed to it. Chelsea invited the princess to visit him, to which Candy gladly agreed. Earl was at a loss. His last hope for a nanny had collapsed. Time passed, and now the prince was 30 months old. The boy thought that his third birthday would soon be. Life is fleeting, as always. The kid wanted to grow up as quickly as possible, because he still had to live to reach adulthood, but he already wanted to learn how to pick up girls normally. He was told in his 45th life that you can meet any girl in 10 minutes. Suddenly, the sound of shoes was heard outside the door. Earl didn't know what the sound was, but he became alert. Candy quickly rushed to the door and loudly greeted Earl. But when the girl entered the room, the baby was no longer there. The princess looked for the boy throughout the palace, but he was nowhere to be found. Suddenly Candy discovered small feet behind the curtain. The girl pretended not to see him, and she walked carefully towards the curtains. And then the princess suddenly opened the curtains and caught little Earl. The inspired girl invited the prince to play hide and seek, but he mentally refused. The princess grabs the boy's hand and offers to go to a more spacious place. The children went outside. The girl quickly found the prince, and said that now it was his turn to look. After Lady Shelley's visit, Princess Candy became a frequent guest here, but not without the help of the ubiquitous nanny. But the guy was glad that at least a strong friendship would begin between his mother and Lady Shelley. Candy said, "Isn't she the best little sister? Earl is still little, but she can take care of him." The princess added that when her brother grows up, he will take care of her. She asked him to promise to come as soon as she calls him. The brother agreed, but mentally noted the girl's excessive intrusiveness. Candy said she adored Earl, which surprised the boy. The girl said that compared to Leon or Meryl, Earl is the most fun to play with. With a sparkling face, the girl said that Earl was the best option. The boy said in his thoughts that as he grows up, Candy will regret these words. The girl took her brother in her arms and told him that they would go somewhere to play, but the boy began to choke from this. Suddenly a woman ran up to the children and asked the girl to let the prince go, because he was in pain. The maid added that the princess should give her the boy. The woman said that there is no need to carry heavy things, because Candy is still small. Earl grabbed Candy's maid's leg and mentally sighed with relief. The girl capriciously said that she wanted to play, but the woman suggested that she draw a little or listen to classical music. Candy immediately refused, noting these activities as boring. In response, the maid asked the baby what she wanted to do. The girl turned her head to the sides, noticed a stick on the ground and immediately picked it up. The princess waved her stick and said that she wanted to swing the sword like she saw her brother Kyle do. The boy thoughtfully assessed her movements and mentally commented on them that her center of gravity was shifted. There was no balance, even taking into account the piece of wood. The boy himself loves to fencing. He even misses this feeling. The little girl exclaimed that Sir Knight was knocked down. Victory was awarded to the lady. The maid told Candy that real ladies don't fight, but the girl was indignant about why. The princess asked the woman why brother Kyle and Leonid were allowed, but she was not. The maid explained to the little girl that she was a princess, and she was not supposed to get her hands dirty. In the end, the woman sighed and asked the girl not to argue, because this is the custom, because first of all, a princess should be elegant and feminine. But while the maid was talking, the girl took away her sword. The woman ran after Candy and asked to return the sword, but the princess refused and said that she would practice fencing. The maid suggested that the girl take at least a smaller sword. Earl, meanwhile, was watching all this and noticed that he was even starting to like Candy's sister. Years passed. Earl turned 5 years old, and so the boy rode a horse along with other riders. But Earl was still a child. That's why he rode on a wooden toy horse. Chelsea offered the prince a ride on a real horse, but the boy refused, noting that it was dangerous. The maid noted that all the boys were interested in horses and swords and hinted that it was time for Earl. But the kid said that princes on a white horse are already relics of the past, and he called the nanny a tuber lying around. Earl thought, of all the lives he had experienced, there was only one knowledge he had not properly absorbed, and that was how to drive people crazy. The guy reached the top in fencing, defeating many strong opponents. He also succeeded in the magical field, incinerating all obstacles in his path. He honed every skill that the guy undertook to develop in past lives to perfection, so it turned out that now he doesn't even have much to do. The nanny knocked on the boy's room, but he asked what she wanted and explained that he was busy so that the nanny would leave him alone. Chelsea wished the boy to do a good job, but the boy mentally said that only fools work and fell onto the bed. After some time, the nanny said something to Earl, which made the boy almost cry. The woman asked the boy if he didn't want to study that much. The kid said yes, he doesn't want to. The maid continued to persuade the boy. She said that Earl was already 5 years old, and it was time to explore the world around him from different sides. But the prince answered the woman that he didn't want to know anything. The other side was enough for him. He was not at all interested in learning. The nanny sighed and said that the prince spoke as if he had lived 100 lives, to which the boy looked at her warily for a second, because he did not understand how she knew. The boy tried to object, but he thought that science was already in his liver. The prince reflected that he was tired of studying again and again, and so on every time, to which the maid replied that according to imperial law, 5 years is the age at which it is time to study. The nanny said that she had brought simple books, and with these words she laid a stack on the table, and the boy was indignant that there were not enough of them. The prince took the book in his hands and said that he loved books. He would turn them, and he began to spin one of the books in his hand. But the maid said with annoyance that books should be read, not twisted. Earl took the books and began stacking them at home on the carpet, and the woman reproached the boy, saying that he shouldn't be ashamed, because as he knows, many children of commoners simply dream of studying, but they don't have the opportunity, and most of them don't even know how to read. The maid sat down next to the boy on the carpet, causing his house to collapse. Chelsea told Earl that he should respect books. The woman ordered the baby to stop playing around and sit up straight, and the prince was only thinking about how to get rid of the annoying servant as quickly and efficiently as possible. Suddenly the boy came up with something. He fell to the floor and began to fight with his arms and legs, shouting that he did not want and would not study. Suddenly the door opened and Mom came in, and Earl's concert ended with the kneeling pose of a diligent student. The boy was taken to the library and made to read. Earl himself understood that he should study at that age, but ironically, the more he tries, the more he endangers the people around him. After all, the more talented the son of the concubine and the emperor, the sooner they will want to get rid of him. It may seem unfair, but fate has already decided everything for us. Therefore, the boy concluded that he had no choice but to take everything into his own hands. The maid brought tea to the boy in the library. She said that the prince should try harder, then his mother would be happy. Earl asked if this was true and picked up the tea. The boy told Chelsea that he thought he was too lazy for this, but the nanny asked the boy to think carefully. The servant continued that if the boy continued to behave this way, Lady Lillian would be very upset, and these words made the prince sad. The kid didn't want to let his mother down, so he agreed with the maid and said that he would study, but mentally said that everything except fencing would definitely hit him in the side and magic too. While the boy was writing, he wondered what he would grow up to be without all this. A week later, a wagon drove right up to Earl's house. The boy looked out the window and realized who it was. It was the magician from the tower. The nanny explained that it was he who came, and the magician came to help the prince learn magic. The maid added that first we need to determine whether the boy has a talent for magic, and then we can start studying. But Earl resisted this in his thoughts. The boy realized that if this was a strong magician, he would definitely feel his power. But the prince now has a huge amount of energy that he has accumulated over all his years, and he needs to somehow hide his abilities. The maid told the boy with a smile that everything would go quickly and painlessly and added that Earl need not be afraid. And so the prince and his maid entered the hall where the magician was sitting at the table and waiting to meet Earl. Suddenly, the magician's gaze changed from calm to shocked, his eyes bulging at the boy. The man jumped out of his chair, but the guy saw it himself. Earl saw his energy flowing inside his body, but the kid was interested in how the magician saw him. The man approached the boy, he touched his hand and was surprised. The maid joyfully asked whether their child was special, but the magician said that the word special was not right, and the man added that he was special, not in a pleasant way. The boy with skepticism on his face asked what was the matter. The magician explained that he did not sense any mana in the prince at all. The maid asked again with annoyance and added that it couldn't be, but the man explained that he even probed magically, but found nothing, and the prince sat and smiled, because his sudden plan worked. On the way here, Earl carefully curtailed the circulation of his mana. then concentrating the mana at one point. The boy threw out all his energy. Seeing the magician's reaction to the appearance of the prince, he sighed with relief, because he simply cannot see mana if it is not there. However, the fact that the magician did not find a single grain of mana in the prince's body has its downsides. The magician told Lillian that Earl had no inclination for magic, but the woman did not immediately understand his words. The man explained that even a commoner can often see at least a drop of mana, but the prince simply does not have it. Now the boy was no longer confident in his spontaneous actions. The woman summed up upsetly that her son would not be a magician. The boy sadly thought that he had only disappointed his mother. The prince mentally apologized to the woman and explained that this was necessary. Everyone should think that the boy was weak and incapable, and her incompetent son had just started his business. Some time later, the kid was introduced to a new mentor, this time in fencing. The man enthusiastically announced to the boy that he would teach him fencing skills. The man added that if the prince trained hard, he would soon become as strong as him. This man was a young knight who was no more than 25 years old. Mentally, the boy called him a weakling and said that he was still as far away from a real knight as the moon. After all, the boy's body is hardened in so many battles with the most terrible creatures. In past lives, the guy fought with various dragons and other monsters. Therefore, he considered this knight not worthy to teach him. The boy answered the knight to begin teaching him. The mentor replied with a smile that the prince should trust him and would definitely become stronger. But Earl sighed with indignation. The boy remembered that he once saw Candy's sister wearing weights to improve her physical abilities. The knight confirmed that this was normal for their family, but the boy found it creepy. The man explained that the basic things for fencing are flexibility and balance. With these words, the mentor began to show exercises for repetition with a rapier. The mentor told the prince not to worry, because they would start with the simplest thing. They started with balance training. Earl found it difficult even at a low altitude. Then the man reassured him, saying that the boy would not get hurt if he fell from such a height. But the kid admitted that he was afraid of any height and did not control it. Then they moved on to flexibility training. The man told the boy that since he was young, this should be easy. But the prince couldn't cope with this workout either. He couldn't do the stretching. Another training was on accuracy. The man commanded to point the sword exactly at the target to hit it. But the boy, swinging his sword, accidentally dropped it. The mentor's enthusiasm noticeably diminished. The boy asked if he was mediocre, but the man good-naturedly replied that this was only the first training. If the prince continued to practice, he would succeed. The man gave the boy his sword and instructed him how to hold it. Earl noticed himself being followed from the nearby forest, but the spy had already left. The boy understood that the more mediocre his result, the sooner they would fall behind. Rumors spread quickly. The aristocrats discussed that Prince Earl had no more mana than a commoner, and his body was so weak that he could barely stand on his feet. Even the Empress was told that Lillian's son had no talent for fencing at all. Ella turned to the servant and said with a smile that it was nice to hear this. Rumors can calm vigilance, because the boy, having survived so many lives, knew this. The boy asked the servant if the new teacher would come, to which the woman replied that yes, he would be soon. Now everyone is saying that Earl is a useless prince. Almost all of the teachers refused to teach the kid. And yet there was a hero who decided to come. Suddenly a knock was heard from the window. The boy jumped up from the table and ran up to look out the window to see who was there. A guy entered the room and introduced himself as Emil, and from today on he will be the prince's teacher. The young man added that he would teach the boy foreign languages. The boy noticed hopelessness on the teacher's face. It was clear that he was forced. Emil unloaded the books onto the table and explained that this is a standard textbook. It will allow you to learn the basics of grammar in one day. The young man added that this is a normal pace of study. Tomorrow he plans to move on to a new topic. And then he summed up that the prince would quickly get used to it. The boy answered him that he would try his best. But in his mind he thought that there was something wrong with this guy. Emil said that bad grades are possible. But there is no need to be upset, because studying is first of all a matter of interest, and then abilities. The boy did not understand in his mind what kind of strange things the guy was instilling in him, even without his consent. The boy had the idea that the teacher decided to simply ignore him in all lessons, so the boy had an idea about this. Although he is small, in past lives he has studied many languages. Earl could boast of linguistic abilities, so he decided to sneak into the library at night to carry out his plan. The boy concentrated his mana in his hand. It took the form of a sphere with a bright blue light. The kid said that first he needed to find a dictionary, and with these words he launched the energy forward. Blue waves of mana slid across the shelves, finding the right grammar books for Earl. A wave of mana picked up the desired publication and carried it to the boy. The boy continued to emit waves of mana and took the literature he needed for his studies. The books swirled in the air as if in a round dance, on waves of blue mana light. The boy raised his hand and directed streams of energy to the right places, picking up books that interested him from the shelves. And so streams of mana put everything needed for further study into piles on the table. The boy reasoned that there was so much interesting stuff in the world, but all languages were built on a similar principle, so it was only a matter of time before he got around to teaching. The boy studied books all night to implement his idea. In the morning, the teacher arrived at the palace to conduct classes. He told the boy that this was a bad joke. The man did not believe that the prince could learn all the material, but Earl stood his ground. He said that he was not lying, it was true, and offered to start. Emil asked the boy in disbelief if he really remembered everything, but the prince replied that there was no need to lie to him. Compared to the languages of neighboring countries, the native imperial language was still a little difficult. The young man invited the boy to read a book and hand him a manual. No matter how smart a child is, reading even one simple book before the age of 12 is difficult. And then a 5-year-old child learned languages in just 2 days. The boy took the book and began to read it without any difficulty. Emil came at first with great shock, and then with indescribable delight, and praised the boy. When a student succeeds, the teacher's reputation increases. Earl grinned sarcastically at his mentor. The boy chose for himself something in which he could be a genius in high society. In the evening, in one of the establishments, they were already discussing the boy that he was not even able to hold a sword in his hands. How such mediocrity could learn languages in just 2 days. One of the visitors suggested that the boy might be just as good in the exact sciences. The rumor that the prince was still a bit of a genius quickly spread, and the source of the rumors was Emil, who, after a little success, immediately went to gossip in the bar. He told other visitors that he was able to discern great potential in the boy. Every child has a hidden talent. The mentor boasted that he was able to reveal this talent in all its glory. Finally, rumors reached the emperor. Tyler reasoned that, apparently, the sword or magic was simply not his path, because it was not easy to do something he didn't like. Lillian sincerely regretted that she had upset the emperor. The woman thought that her son had changed a lot. The lady even wondered if she was raising him correctly. The emperor approached his concubine and asked if she was really worried about her son, but then the man added that he thought Earl was growing up to be a wonderful boy, and the prince himself, smiling slyly, mentally said that he would still show them miracles, but it was better to serve them in doses in order to maintain interest in his person. In the meantime, the boy decided to relax and reap the benefits, because he was now recognized as a genius. A few days later, the house where Earl and his mother lived was given many nights. The boy watched their arrival from the window with a smile. The prince reasoned that the emperor probably decided that it was necessary to better protect someone who himself did not know how to fight, and noticed his dad's thoughtfulness in this. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. The kid asked who was there. They apologized and 2 maids came in and brought in the chest. The prince asked them what was in it. Lillian came in next and explained that the chest contained gifts from His Majesty. The boy was sincerely surprised that the gift was for him and approached the chest, intending to open it. Mom and both maids smiled joyfully and waited impatiently for the boy to open the gift. The kid opened the chest and admired it. It was filled with gold, precious stones and expensive jewelry. Earl marveled at so much gold and jewelry, but suddenly his attention was attracted by a pendant with a red ruby. The boy asked what kind of pendant it was. The maids asked the boy how he liked the gifts from the emperor, but the prince did not like that his question was ignored, so he again asked what kind of pendant it was. The guy decided to speculate about the thing himself. It seems that this pendant helps you concentrate and activates your mental abilities, but most likely, this thing just makes your brain boil, and you start to get very tired. Chelsea's maid admired the prince's erudition and said it was amazing, and the prince agreed with her words. The boy thought that an ordinary person only sees a precious pendant, but Earl saw mana inside the stone. However, the prince had no use for it. The boy thought that he wanted to give this pendant to his sister Candy, since she has been training so much lately that she will soon become an orangutan. The prince asks his mother if he can give this pendant to his sister Candy. Lillian replies that this is a gift from His Majesty. But she does not think that the emperor will be very against if the boy gives one thing. The boy happily smiled back at the woman. Mom decided to ask her son what he liked so much about Candy. And Earl replied that she was strong. Everyone laughed at this answer. It was a happy day for all the inhabitants of the castle, because the emperor generously gifted the prince. Meanwhile, the knight who was Earl's fencing mentor declared with his sword outstretched that everyone should understand the task assigned to them to protect the concubine's castle and take pride in this mission. In the castle, the prince was sitting in the dining room. He was served desserts, and was told that these were the chef's best pastries. The boy began to try each of the desserts on the table in turn. But the prince didn't like everything. Everything was wrong. The maid advised the prince to chew more slowly, because it should taste better. But the boy continued to stuff everything into his mouth and choke on desserts. A little later, Earl realized that all the desserts on the table were tasteless. They were almost not sweet. The maid grabbed her cheek with annoyance, and began to say that the chef had sworn and suggested that the prince call him. But the baby persistently asked the maid to call the alchemist. The boy wanted modern sweets and drinks that he liked in past lives, so the prince needs the help of an alchemist to recreate the taste of those sweets. The maid asked the prince why she should call the alchemist, but the boy hesitated to answer because he couldn't come up with anything intelligible. The kid began to reason that the maid would still not understand, even if Earl tried to explain to her in detail. It was still strange when a 5-year-old child demanded to call the alchemist. But the prince understood that it was impossible to create the taste he liked without the help of an alchemist. And the boy himself had no idea how food was processed to obtain the taste of the drinks he wanted. And still there are no such technologies in this world. But the boy so wanted to try his favorite flavors of drinks that he had tried in past lives. So the prince decided that since he was a genius, he would come up with something. The boy got up from the table and ran as fast as he could out of the dining room. The maid then asked where the prince was going, but he replied that he was going to study. But the servant did not believe what she heard, because before it was impossible to force the boy to study, so she thought that she had misheard.